the myths and misperceptions that people have around mushrooms and foraging and really the safety around this issue. I was hoping Dr. Rangan could help host our activity. I think we're calling it Mushroom Mythbusters. So take it away, Sai.
All right, let's get started. Okay, so our myth number one, cooking foraged mushrooms removes its toxins.
I'll go first. So I don't think that that's true. I think that that's a myth because I know that some of the patients that we had this last outbreak, they actually did cook the mushrooms, but they still got sick. So I would say that this is false.
Right. Yeah. So it's people have talked about this kind of issue when it comes to food in general. Now, when we think about cooking something like chicken or fish, of course, we want to cook it to a high enough temperature to make sure that bacteria that causes food poisoning will be killed off. And that's definitely true. And that's why we cook chicken to a certain temperature and fish and other meats to a certain temperature. But when it comes to toxins that are in mushrooms, these are not the kinds of toxins that simply just get eliminated by heat and by cooking. So just because you cooked it doesn't mean the mushroom's not going to be toxic. Next one. Okay. Poisonous mushrooms are always brightly colored. Myth or truth?
That's a myth. That's not true. So there's many mushrooms out there that are brightly colored and very attractive, but they're not, the color doesn't really have any bearing. In fact, one of the poison Amanita ocreata or Western destroying angel is completely white. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, very good points. And even more broadly, I think it's also important for our viewers to know that, lots of edible mushrooms and poisonous mushrooms can look a lot alike to each other. And even the mushroom experts will say that, yeah, it is difficult to tell them apart. And with specialized training, maybe you can tell them apart. But just looking at one aspect, like the color of the mushroom or something else like that, is not enough to be able to tell you whether or not it's toxic. All right, next one. All right. Poisonous mushrooms taste bad. Myth or truth?
Well, I was listening very carefully to Dr. Meyer's comments. So I know she mentioned several times that some of these poisonous mushrooms actually do not taste bad. So I think that this one is a myth as well.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And in fact, some of the toxic mushrooms, in fact, taste very good. And so this can be very problematic, especially when you have situations where people are going out into the wild and foraging on their own without that specialized local training that Dr. Meyer was talking about. And as a result, getting exposed to some very toxic mushrooms, even though they taste okay. So it's not the same as something like spoiled food. Spoiled food will taste bad and it can give you a lot of medical problems. But mushrooms, the toxic ones, don't necessarily taste bad. Myth number 4, or truth. You can tell a poisonous mushroom by its smell.
That's false. Now, when trying to identify a mushroom, the smell is very important. Some mushrooms have a maple syrup smell. Some have an almond smell. But many of the toxic mushrooms may not have, depending on what kind of poisoning you're talking about, may not have a smell at all.
Yeah, so I think this just kind of goes to the larger picture of just, you can't just use how a mushroom looks or how it tastes or how it smells to try to determine whether or not it's a toxic versus an edible mushroom. Again, unless you have specialized training to be able to tell the difference. All right. Thank you for playing. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, that's some great information, and I really appreciate all of the advice that we've been able to share. Let's wrap up with a few safety tips around wild mushrooms and keeping people safe. First, don't eat wild mushrooms. I think we've said that several times, is if you're not an expert and you're not sure what you're doing, please don't go out into the wild and forage and eat mushrooms. That's a very dangerous habit. And that was the common denominator with this last large outbreak that we had, was people were going out and foraging wild mushrooms. Second safety tip is these mushrooms are out there right now, and they're fruiting very successfully because of all of the winter rains that we've had. And we can expect them to continue to be out there throughout the spring months. So just know that they're found all over California, down into Southern California in some cases. So just know that they're going to be found all over the state, and just be careful whenever you're out there, because they will be seen for the next few weeks to months. And third, I think we mentioned this as well, which is that they can look a lot like edible mushrooms, which is what gets people into trouble. So just remember, if you don't eat wild mushrooms, then you won't be in danger of mushroom poisoning. Really, we encourage people to go to farmers markets, grocery stores, other mushroom vendors where people have really taken that safety precaution to make sure that they're serving up and selling safe mushrooms. And that's the best way. If you need mushrooms in your dishes and your recipes, that's the best way to acquire mushrooms for your food.